For 21 consecutive nights, Derek Torres had stood in the same doorway at 3:17 in the morning, watching his daughter sleep. The digital clock on Lily's nightstand cast a pale blue glow across her small form, illuminating the way her fingers clutched the faded pink rabbit, even in unconsciousness, knuckles white against matted fur. She held that stuffed animal like a drowning person grips a life preserver, and somewhere in the rational part of his mind, Derek understood that metaphor wasn't far from the truth. The house was silent except for the soft whisper of the central heating and the occasional creak of settling wood. Outside the San Bernardino suburbs slept peacefully rows of modest homes with trim lawns and sensible cars parked in driveways. Inside, Derek Torres kept his solitary vigil, a 52-year-old man in worn sweatpants and a faded Marine Corps t-shirt standing guard against an enemy he couldn't see and couldn't name. Lily's lips moved in her sleep, forming words that never quite became sound. Not the little songs she used to invent while coloring those wordless melodies that had filled their home with something close to joy. These were different sounds entirely. Small whimpers, soft moans of distress, the vocabulary of nightmares. Derek looked down at his hands in the darkness. These hands had held an M4 carbine through 36 months of combat in Helmand Province. These hands had pulled triggers and applied tourniquets and cradled dying friends in the dust and heat of Afghanistan. These hands had lifted Lily for the first time in a San Diego hospital room, her tiny body weighing almost nothing, her enormous eyes staring up at him like he was the entire universe condensed into human form. He had made a promise in that hospital room, silently to himself and to whatever power might be listening. He would protect this child. He would shield her from every danger, absorb every blow meant for her, stand between her and anything that might cause her harm. He was a United States Marine. Protection was what he did. But these hands couldn't touch whatever was hurting his daughter now. This enemy had no face, no location, no vulnerable points to target. It existed somewhere in the hours between when Elena dropped Lily off at Pine Ridge Elementary and when she picked her up in the afternoon. It lived in the silence that had descended on his daughter, like a burial shroud smothering everything bright and beautiful about her. 3 weeks, 21 days of watching Lily fade. And Derek Torres, decorated combat veteran member of the Hells Angels Brotherhood, a man who had faced death in a dozen different forms and walked away each time, stood helpless in his daughter's doorway, unable to do a single thing to save her. The memory came unbidden, as it often did in these small hours when his defenses were down. Helmand Province, 2009. A village that had fallen too quiet. His patrol, moving through narrow streets with weapons raised every sense, screaming that something was wrong. Silence could be peaceful, could mean safety. But this silence had weight to it. This silence was the held breath before catastrophe. They had learned to read silence in Afghanistan, to understand its different textures and temperatures. The silence of a village going about its business with children playing and women cooking and men gathered in doorways was different from the silence of a village that had been warned, different from the silence of a trap. Lily's silence had weight to it. It was the second kind, the dangerous kind. And every instinct Derek possessed, every survival sense honed through years of combat, told him that his daughter was in danger. Something was hunting her, hurting her, and she couldn't or wouldn't tell him what it was. He stood in that doorway for another 20 minutes, watching her chest rise and fall, before finally retreating to his own bed where sleep would not come. It rarely did anymore. The morning brought no relief. Derek was already in the kitchen when Elena Gutierrez arrived at 7, her oversized bag filled with patience and the kind of gentle warmth that had made her irreplaceable in their lives. 64 years old with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun and hands that had spent decades caring for children, Elena had been with them since Lily was 2. She had seen the diagnosis come, had seen Christina leave, had stayed when others might have walked away. "Senor Derek." Her voice carried concern as she set her bag on the counter. "You look like you haven't slept again." "Coffee helps." He didn't look up from the cup he was nursing his third since 4 a.m. "How was the drive?" "The drive was fine." Elena moved to stand across the counter from him, her dark eyes studying his face with the practiced assessment of someone who had raised her own children and watched over countless others. "How was our Lily this morning?" "Still sleeping. Didn't come out for breakfast yesterday. Barely touched dinner the night before." Elena was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. I need to tell you something. Something I noticed. Derek set down his coffee cup. The ceramic made a small sound against the granite countertop. Tell me. Every morning when I take her to school, something happens when we get close to the building. Her whole body changes. Elena's weathered hands came together, fingers interlacing. She starts to shake, not from cold, from fear. And when we reach the gate, she grabs my hand so hard, she leaves marks. She extended her arm, pushing up her sleeve. On her wrist, fading to yellow now, but still visible, were the crescents of small fingernails pressed deep into skin, the marks of a child holding on with desperate strength. Derek stared at those marks. Something cold and sharp began to crystallize in his chest. How long has this been happening? Since it started, since she changed. I should have told you sooner, but I thought maybe it was just a phase. The school kept saying everything was fine. Her teacher kept saying, what did her teacher say? Elena's eyes dropped, that Lily was adjusting, that children on the spectrum sometimes withdraw, that you were being overprotective. The cold thing in Derek's chest grew sharper. He had called Pine Ridge Elementary twice in the past 3 weeks. Both times Miss Crawford had assured him everything was normal. Both times Principal Morrison had backed her up. Perhaps they had suggested with professional condescension the problem was not at school but at home. Perhaps Lily's single father was projecting his own anxieties onto his daughter. She's not adjusting. Derek's voice came out flat, controlled the way it used to sound over the radio in firefights. She's not going through a phase. Something is happening to her in that building, and I'm going to find out what. The sound of soft footsteps stopped both adults mid-conversation. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her pajamas, the pink rabbit clutched against her chest. Her eyes, those enormous brown eyes that had once sparkled with curiosity about the world, were dull now, flat, like windows with the blinds drawn. Morning, baby girl. Derek forced lightness into his voice the way the therapist had taught him. Keep things calm. Keep things predictable. Want some breakfast? Elena can make your favorite pancakes. Lily shook her head without speaking. She hadn't spoken more than a handful of words in days. The extensive vocabulary she had worked so hard to develop, the communication skills that her speech therapist had celebrated as remarkable progress, all of it had retreated behind whatever wall had risen inside her. She crossed to the table and sat down in her usual chair, but she didn't reach for the crayons and paper that had been left out overnight. The crayons had been untouched for weeks now. The pages that once filled with purple skies and orange trees and stick figures with smiles bigger than their faces remained blank. Derek crouched beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level the way he always did when something important needed to be said. Lily turned toward him, and the absence in her gaze made his heart perform some complicated maneuver in his chest. Lily, sweetheart, can you tell Daddy if something is bothering you? If someone said something or did something that made you feel bad? Her grip tightened on the rabbit. Her eyes dropped to the table's surface. You can tell me anything. Anything at all. I promise I'll listen. I promise I'll help. Nothing. No words, no acknowledgement. Just the white-knuckled grip on matted pink fur and the terrible weighted silence that told him everything and nothing at the same time. Behind them, Elena wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron. The announcement arrived in Lily's backpack on a Friday afternoon, crumpled between a math worksheet and an untouched permission slip. Career Day, the following Thursday. Students were encouraged to dress as their future professions. Parents were welcome to attend. Derek smoothed the paper on the kitchen table and read it 3 times, his mind already turning over possibilities. This could be an opportunity. If he went to the school, not during the scheduled parent visiting hours, but earlier unannounced, he might see what happened when they didn't know they were being watched. He had learned the value of surprise in Afghanistan. Scheduled travel followed predictable routes at predictable times, and the enemy learned to avoid them. The intelligence that mattered came from the unexpected, from showing up where you weren't supposed to be, and seeing what people did when they thought no one was looking. But first there was Lily to consider. He found her in her room that evening, sitting on the bed with her rabbit in her lap, staring at the white doctor's coat hanging on the back of her door. She hadn't asked for it. He had ordered it on a hunch, remembering how she used to light up during her medical appointments, fascinated by the kind professionals who explained everything before they did it, who spoke softly and treated her differences with respect rather than impatience. Hey, baby girl. Derek settled on the floor beside her bed, keeping his voice low and even. I saw the paper about career day. Do you know what you want to be when you grow up? Silence stretched between them, long enough that Derek began to think he wouldn't get an answer at all. Then so soft he almost missed it, Lily spoke. Doctor. One word, but it was the first complete word she had said in days. Derek felt something crack open in his chest, hope bleeding through the fractures of his worry. Like the ones at your appointments, the ones who are always so nice to you. A small nod, the tiniest movement of her head. They talk quiet, they explain things, they don't yell. They don't yell, three words that landed like hammer blows. Derek filed them away, adding them to the growing evidence that something at school was very, very wrong. Would you like to dress as a doctor for career day? There, I could get you a coat like the real doctors wear, and maybe a stethoscope. For the first time in 3 weeks, something flickered in Lily's eyes. Not quite the spark he remembered, not the full brightness of the daughter he knew, but something. A candle flame glimpsed through fog. Real pocket. Real pocket. Just like theirs. The package arrived 2 days later. White coat, child-sized crisp fabric with a functional pocket on the front. Toy stethoscope with a bell that actually picked up heartbeats if you pressed it against skin hard enough. Derek watched Lily unwrap it with the careful precision that was characteristic of how she approached everything, each layer of paper folded neatly aside rather than torn. When she saw the coat, she smiled. Small, fleeting, but real. Her lips curved upward and her eyes brightened for just a moment before the shadows crept back in. Derek captured that image in his memory like a photograph, something to hold on to in the dark hours of the night. Thank you, Daddy, whispered, barely audible. But she said it. She used words. And when she tried on the coat standing in front of her mirror with the stethoscope around her neck, she looked almost like the little girl she had been before everything changed. Almost. The night before career day, Derek sat in his truck in the driveway and made a phone call he had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Grizzly picked up on the second ring. Samuel Hendricks, 58 years old, vice president of the San Bernardino chapter of the Hells Angels, the man who had pulled Derek back from the edge of oblivion 5 years ago and given him a reason to keep breathing. Derek, the voice was gravel and smoke roughened by decades of hard living. Everything all right? No. Derek watched the lights in Lily's window, the shadow of Elena moving past as she put his daughter to bed. Something's wrong with Lily. Something at school. I've been trying to figure it out for 3 weeks and I'm no closer than when I started. Silence on the line. Not the empty kind, the listening kind. The kind that said, I'm here, tell me more. She stopped talking, stopped singing, stopped drawing. She's been carrying this one stuffed rabbit everywhere like it's the only thing keeping her alive. Derek's voice caught, and he took a breath to steady it. The school keeps saying everything's fine, but I know my daughter, and something is breaking her. What's your play? Career day is tomorrow. Parents are invited, but I'm not waiting for the official visiting hours. I'm going early, unannounced. I need to see what happens when they don't know I'm watching. Grizzly was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. And if you find something, then I call you. Derek gripped the phone tighter. If I find something, I'll need brothers. I'll need witnesses. I'll need people who will stand with me and make sure the truth doesn't get buried. You'll have them. No hesitation. No questions about details or logistics or inconvenience. Just the simple, absolute commitment of brotherhood. You find something tomorrow, you call. We'll be there inside of 20 minutes. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Grizzly's voice softened just slightly. Just find out what's hurting that little girl, and then we'll make sure it stops. The call ended, but Derek sat in his truck for another hour watching the light in Lily's window until it went dark. Tomorrow he would have answers. Tomorrow, one way or another, he would understand what was stealing his daughter's light. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of sunshine that felt like a promise. Derek woke at 5, though calling what he had done sleep was generous. He made coffee, he showered, he dressed in clothes suitable for a school visit, leaving his leather vest hanging in the closet where it belonged. Elena arrived at 7 carrying her usual bag of supplies, and wearing an expression of careful hope. She had been briefed on the plan, and though she worried about what Derek might find, she understood why he needed to look. Lily was already awake when they went to check on her, sitting on her bed with the rabbit in her lap, staring at the doctor's coat on the door with an expression that hovered somewhere between longing and fear. The dressing became a ritual. First, the pink top that Lily had chosen herself, soft cotton in her favorite color. Then the white shorts, practical and comfortable. Elena guided Lily's small arms through the sleeves of the doctor's coat with the reverence of someone robbing royalty, fastening each button with careful attention. The stethoscope came last, draped around Lily's neck, and adjusted until it hung just right. Lily touched it gently, her fingers tracing the rubber tubing, and for a moment the shadows in her eyes seemed to retreat. Elena stepped back, her weathered hands coming to rest on her hips. "The most beautiful doctor I have ever seen." Lily's lips curved upward. Not a full smile, but something close. Something that made Derek's heart ache with hope and terror in equal measure. He emerged from his bedroom to find them in the hallway, Lily standing in her costume like a small white beacon of determination. The coat was slightly too big for her, the sleeves extending past her wrists, but she wore it with a dignity that transcended its ill fit. Derek crouched to meet her eyes the way he always did when something important needed to be said. Lily looked at him, the rabbit tucked under one arm, her free hand gripping the stethoscope. "You look perfect, baby girl." His voice came out rough. "A real doctor. You're going to have such a good day." He wanted to believe it, needed to believe it. Maybe this was the turning point. Maybe whatever had been hurting her was behind them now. Maybe today would be the day his daughter came back to him completely. Lily nodded but didn't speak. The silence between them felt fragile, like glass about to shatter. Elena gathered Lily's backpack, double-checking the contents with practiced efficiency. Lunchbox, water bottle. The permission slip Derek had finally signed. She took Lily's hand and together they walked toward the front door. Derek followed them out, watching as Elena buckled Lily into the car seat, making sure the coat didn't wrinkle. Through the window he could see his daughter's profile, the white coat bright against the dark interior of Elena's sedan. She looked brave. She looked ready. She looked like she was trying so hard to be okay. He tapped on the window. Lily turned and he raised his thumb in the gesture they had shared 1,000 times before. Their thing, their language. When words felt too hard, she raised her thumb back. Elena pulled away from the curb, and Derek watched until the car disappeared around the corner. The morning sun caught the white of Lily's coat through the rear window one last time before she was gone. He stood there on the sidewalk, coffee growing cold in his hand, trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong, that sending her to school today is a mistake, that he should have kept her home, kept her safe, kept her away from whatever was lurking in that building. But he pushed the feeling down. He was being paranoid, overprotective. She was going to have a good day. She was going to be fine. The outfit Lily left home in that morning, that crisp white doctor's coat that had brought the first real light to her eyes in weeks, wouldn't be what she was wearing an hour later. Derek arrived at Pine Ridge Elementary at 9:45, 15 minutes before the scheduled career day presentations were supposed to begin. He had told his crew at the garage he would be late, didn't explain why, didn't need to. When you run with brothers who understand that family comes first, you don't have to justify choosing your daughter over a day's work. The parking lot was fuller than he expected. Minivans and sedans packed into spaces marked for visitors. Parents arriving early to watch their children's moment in the spotlight. Derek found a spot near the back, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the silence of his truck. His hands gripped the steering wheel harder than necessary. He forced himself to breathe, to relax. This was just a school visit, just a father checking in. Nothing dramatic, nothing confrontational. He just needed to see Lily in her element to understand what happened during the hours she spent away from him. The memory surfaced again, as it so often did in moments of stress. Hellman, 2009. A compound they had been ordered to clear. Intel suggested enemy combatants inside, but something felt wrong. The angles were bad, the sightlines favored defenders. His platoon leader wanted to breach immediately, but Derek had argued for patience, for observation, for understanding the situation before committing. They had waited. They had watched. And what they discovered was that the compound was a trap rigged with explosives that would have killed half his squad if they had rushed in blind. Patience. observation, understanding. Those lessons had saved his life in Afghanistan. They might save his daughter now. The front office waved him through without question. Career day meant parent visitors were expected. He signed the clipboard, accepted a visitor badge, and followed the signs toward the first grade wing. The hallways smelled like every elementary school in America. Crayons and cleaning supplies, and the particular sweetness of juice boxes. Construction paper decorations lined the walls. Student artwork celebrating spring and sunshine, and the things 6-year-olds thought were important. Derek walked slowly, his boots echoing on the linoleum, following the sound of children's voices. Room 104, Miss Crawford's class, Lily's room. The door was closed but not locked. Through the small window, Derek could see movement inside. Bright colors, small bodies shifting in their seats. He reached for the handle, turned it slowly, and pushed the door open. What he saw stopped his heart mid-beat. Lily stood at the front of the classroom, and she was trembling. Not the small nervousness of a child about to present, the full body shaking of someone in distress, someone afraid, someone whose world had just become unbearable. She was wearing a clown costume. Oversized rainbow-colored clothing swallowed her small frame. Baggy striped pants pulled around her ankles. A ruffled collar circled her neck. And her face, her beautiful face, was painted with garish makeup, white foundation, exaggerated red smile, blue diamonds over her eyes. The paint was smeared, streaked with the clear tracks of tears that had cut through it. Derek's brain refused to process what he was seeing. This wasn't possible. This wasn't what she left home wearing. Elena had dressed her in the doctor's coat. He had seen it himself. He had given her a thumbs up through the car window. His eyes scanned the rest of the classroom, desperate for context, for explanation, for anything that would make this make sense. Every other child was dressed correctly. A miniature firefighter sat in the front row, plastic helmet shining. Behind him, a tiny veterinarian in scrubs with a stuffed dog under her arm. An astronaut, a teacher with a small pointer, a chef with a paper hat, a police officer, an engineer with a toy hard hat. Everyone was exactly what they were supposed to be. Everyone except Lily. Then he saw the teacher. Miss Diane Crawford, 34 years old, stood 3 feet from his daughter. Her finger pointed directly at Lily's face. Her mouth was moving, words coming out in sharp bursts. Derek couldn't hear them clearly over the rushing sound in his ears, but he could read the tone. Harsh, scolding, cruel. Lily's hands clutched the pink rabbit against her chest, the only familiar thing left in her world. Her eyes were squeezed shut, tears leaking from the corners. She was trying to make herself smaller, trying to disappear. And then Derek saw the worst part. On Miss Crawford's desk, propped carefully on a stack of textbooks with the lens facing Lily, was a phone. The screen glowed with the unmistakable red dot of an active recording. She was filming this. Whatever this was, whatever humiliation she had orchestrated, she was capturing it deliberately. The angle was perfect. The framing intentional. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. Something cold and sharp crystallized in Derek's chest. Not the hot flash of immediate anger. Something deeper, something surgical. The kind of rage that thinks clearly, that calculates, that doesn't make mistakes. The memory hit him like a flashback. Helmand, 2009. A Taliban fighter holding a gun to a child's head. Derek had 3 seconds to decide. Pull the trigger immediately or wait for a better angle. Impulse or strategy. He had waited. He had found the shot. He had saved the child without losing any of his squad. Evidence first. Understanding second. Action third. He stepped backward out into the hallway and pulled out his phone. He had a call to make. Grizzly picked up before the second ring finished. Derek, what's wrong? I need everyone. Derek's voice was low and controlled the voice he used to use over combat radio. Pine Ridge Elementary. I need them now. Bring everyone. A pause. Not hesitation. Calculation. How bad? They hurt Lily. 3 words. That was all it took. We're rolling in 10. The line went dead. Derek made 2 more calls. Same message, same response. The Brotherhood didn't ask questions when a child was involved. They didn't need details or explanations or justification. One of their own called for help, used the words that meant, this is serious, and they came. That was what family did. He was pocketing his phone when he heard the sharp click of heels on linoleum. Principal Morrison appeared from around the corner, her expression caught between administrative concern and territorial defensiveness. A woman in her mid-50s who had held this position for 12 years long enough to develop refined radar for trouble brewing in her building. Mr. Torres, she approached with the measured pace of someone trying to appear calm. Is everything all right? I heard you were visiting Miss Crawford's class. Derek looked at her, really looked at her, tried to see if she knew, if she was aware of what was happening in room 104, if she had received complaints before and ignored them, or if she was just another administrator too busy with paperwork to notice a teacher destroying a child. Do you know what's happening in that classroom right now? Morrison's eyebrows drew together. It's career day. The children are presenting their future professions. It's a tradition My daughter is in there dressed as a clown. Derek's voice remained steady, but each word carried weight. She left home this morning in a doctor's coat. White coat, toy stethoscope. Proud as I've ever seen her. Now she's wearing a clown costume she's never owned, crying while your teacher films her with a phone. The principal's face shifted. Confusion first, then concern, then something that looked like dawning horror. Either she was an excellent actress or she genuinely had no idea. I'm sorry, there must be some misunderstanding. Miss Crawford wouldn't. She is. Derek cut her off. And you're about to have visitors, a lot of them. They're not here to cause trouble. They're here because I called them, because my daughter has been coming home broken for 3 weeks, and now I know why. Morrison opened her mouth to respond, but Derek was already walking past her back toward the classroom. He heard her heels clicking faster behind him, her voice rising with administrative authority, making demands about protocol and proper channels and the need to discuss this in her office. Derek ignored all of it. He walked back into room 104 like he owned it. Because in this moment for his daughter, he did. Miss Crawford's head snapped toward the door, her pointed finger dropping to her side. Her expression shifted in an instant from harsh authority to practiced pleasantness. The kind of smile adults wear when they're caught doing something they know they shouldn't be. But Derek wasn't looking at her, not yet. His eyes were locked on Lily. The makeup was worse up close. The white foundation had been applied carelessly, too thick in some places, missed entirely in others. The red paint forming the exaggerated smile extended past her actual lips, making her look like something from a nightmare. But it was the blue diamonds painted over her eyes that broke him. They were smudged now, mixed with tears and sweat streaking down her cheeks in watercolor rivers of misery. Her hands shook as they gripped the rabbit. Not a slight tremor, a full shake that traveled from her fingers up through her small wrists. He had seen that shake before. During her worst meltdowns, when the world became too much and her nervous system overloaded, she was on the edge of a complete breakdown, and she had been holding it together alone in front of all these people. Derek's eyes moved methodically through the rest of the room. 2 other parents stood near the back wall, their expressions uncomfortable. They had been watching this. They had seen whatever happened before he arrived. One of them, a blonde woman in yoga pants and a cashmere sweater, met his eyes briefly before looking away. Guilty, complicit through silence. The children sat frozen in their desks. Some stared at Lily with the cruel curiosity of kids who know someone's in trouble. Others looked down at their hands, uncomfortable witnesses who didn't understand what they were seeing but knew it was wrong. The little firefighter in the front row had tears in his eyes. Miss Crawford took a step toward Derek, her professional smile widening. Oh, hello. You must be Lily's father. We weren't expecting parents until 10, but you're welcome to. Derek held up one hand. Not aggressive, just a simple gesture that said, stop talking. And she did. Something in his eyes, in the set of his jaw, in the way he held himself perfectly still, told her that whatever script she had prepared wouldn't work here. He walked slowly across the classroom, his boots barely making a sound despite their weight. Every student tracked his movement. The room had gone library quiet. When he reached Lily, he crouched beside her, bringing himself to her eye level. She turned toward him, and the relief that flooded her face nearly undid his control. A small sound escaped her throat. Not quite a word, more like a whimper of recognition. Daddy's here. Daddy found me. He wanted to hold her, wanted to pick her up and walk out and never let anyone hurt her again. But not yet. He needed to see more, understand more. His eyes drifted past Lily to the teacher's desk, to the phone still propped on those textbooks. The screen was visible from where he crouched. The red recording dots still glowed, still capturing everything. Derek's mind assembled the pieces with terrible clarity. The clown costume Lily had never owned, the doctor's coat nowhere in sight, the deliberately positioned phone, the teacher's harsh scolding of a traumatized autistic child while recording it all. And suddenly, those 3 weeks of suffering made perfect sense. This wasn't the first time. This was just the first time he had seen it. Miss Crawford shifted her weight defensive now. Mr. Torres, I can explain. Lily seemed overwhelmed by the assignment, so I thought making it fun, making it silly. Derek stood slowly, his hand resting gently on Lily's shoulder. He looked at the teacher with an expression that was somehow worse than anger. Colder, more final. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. What he did next would bring the entire school to a standstill. He turned and walked back toward the classroom door, leaving Lily standing there, leaving the teacher mid-explanation, leaving everyone confused about what had just happened. But as he reached the threshold, he heard it. The first sound was so distant, so faint, that most people in room 104 didn't register it at all. But Derek heard it, a low rumble on the edge of perception, like thunder rolling in from miles away. Right on time, the little girl dressed as a veterinarian was trying to continue her presentation, talking about how she wanted to help sick puppies when she grew up. Her voice was small and sweet, and Miss Crawford was nodding along with forced enthusiasm, trying to pretend the tension in the room didn't exist. Then the window started to rattle, just slightly at first, a vibration in the glass that made the Venetian blinds tap gently against the frames. The veterinarian stopped mid-sentence, distracted by the sound. Other children looked toward the windows, confused. The rumble grew louder, deeper. Not thunder, not traffic. Something else entirely. Something that carried a rhythm, a pulse, the synchronized heartbeat of machinery and power moving as one unit. Miss Crawford's smile faltered. That's probably just construction nearby. Let's continue with... The sound doubled, then tripled. A cascade of engines, each one adding to the chorus until it became impossible to ignore. The walls themselves seemed to vibrate with it. Pencils rolled off desks. A poster in the back corner came loose and drifted to the floor. The classroom went completely silent. Every child turned toward the windows now. Even Lily lifted her head, her tear-streaked face reflecting confusion mixed with something that might have been hope. She looked back at Derek, a question in her eyes. He nodded once. It's okay, baby girl. Daddy's got this. The rumble had become a roar. Miss Crawford moved to the window, pulling the blinds aside with shaking hands. What she saw made her step backward, her professional composure cracking like ice under pressure. The school parking lot was filling with motorcycles. They poured in from every entrance, a river of chrome and leather and rumbling power. Hell's Angels insignia marked every vest, every jacket, a uniform declaration of brotherhood and purpose. They weren't speeding, weren't revving engines unnecessarily. They were simply arriving, parking in organized rows, kickstands going down in near-perfect synchronization. 200 riders, maybe more, and they were all dismounting. The engine sounds began to die one by one until the air filled with a different sound. Boots. Heavy boots hitting pavement, then concrete, then the polished floors of Pine Ridge Elementary School. The first wave entered through the main entrance. Derek knew because he could track their progress by sound alone. The front doors opening. The unified footsteps echoing through the administrative wing. Voices asking calmly, politely where room 104 was located. No one tried to stop them. How do you stop 200 men walking with purpose, with unity, with the kind of quiet determination that says, we are not here to be turned away? They filled the hallway outside the classroom first. Derek could see them through the door's window. Leather vests worn over denim and flannel. Colors displayed proudly. Faces weathered by years of sun and wind and road. Grizzly was at the front, his silver beard braided, his eyes locked on Derek through the glass. A silent question. You good? Derek gave the slightest nod. I'm good, but we've got work to do. More brothers filled in behind. The hallway became a sea of leather and solidarity. They weren't loud, weren't aggressive. They simply existed as an overwhelming presence, a force that changed the fundamental nature of everything happening in this building. Other classroom doors began to open. Teachers peered out their faces, showing various stages of shock and fear. Students pressed against their own windows, eyes wide, mouths open. One second-grade teacher actually gasped audibly. Principal Morrison stood frozen in the hallway, phone still pressed to her ear, surrounded by more bikers than she had probably seen in her entire life. She was trying to maintain authority, trying to speak in her principal voice, but it came out as a whisper. You can't, you can't all be in here. This is a school. There are children. Grizzly looked down at her with an expression that managed to be both respectful and immovable. Yes, ma'am, that's exactly why we're here. Because there are children. The blonde woman in yoga pants who had stood silently in room 104 while Lily suffered pushed through the bikers in the doorway. Her face had gone pale, and when she spoke, her voice carried the sharp edge of privilege, confronting something it didn't understand. This is outrageous. I'm calling my lawyer. I'm calling the police. These, these people have no right to be here. She pointed at Derek with a manicured finger. You, I know who you are. Diane told me about you. The overprotective father who can't accept that his daughter has problems, who blames everyone else instead of, shh, ma'am. Derek's voice cut through her tirade like a blade through paper. Your friend forced my daughter out of the costume she chose, dressed her as a clown without her consent, painted her face while she cried, and filmed the whole thing to post on social media. That's not overprotection. That's recognizing abuse. The blonde woman's mouth opened, closed. Her eyes darted to Miss Crawford, who had gone very, very still. Diane wouldn't. She didn't. The evidence is on her desk. Derek pointed to the phone still recording on its stack of textbooks. 7 hours of footage. Feel free to watch before you call your lawyer. Inside room 104, the children sat in stunned silence. The little firefighter was crying openly now. The veterinarian had abandoned her presentation entirely. And Miss Crawford stood in the center of the room, surrounded by witnesses she hadn't anticipated, caught in a web she had spun herself. Derek walked back to his daughter, crouched beside her one more time, placed his hand gently on her small shoulder. We're going to fix this, baby girl. His voice was soft, meant only for her. Everything that happened to you, everything that made you so scared and so sad, it ends today. I promise. Lily looked up at him, and through the smeared makeup and the tear tracks and the trembling, something shifted in her eyes. Not trust restored entirely. Not the shadows banished completely, but a crack in the wall, a fissure where light could enter. She reached out with one small hand and touched his face. Daddy found out. Whispered, barely audible, but the first complete sentence she had spoken to him in weeks. Daddy found out. He covered her hand with his own. And Daddy's never going to let anyone hurt you like this again. Behind them, the Brotherhood stood watch in the hallway. 200 men who had dropped everything, rearranged their lives, canceled their days to answer one phone call, to stand witness to whatever truth was about to emerge. The phone on Miss Crawford's desk continued to record. The evidence continued to accumulate, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of police sirens began to grow. The storm had arrived, and it was just getting started. Principal Morrison pushed her way into room 104, her face a mask of administrative panic. Behind her, more bikers continued to fill the hallway, their presence transforming the elementary school into something it had never been before. A place where power dynamics had shifted, where the usual rules no longer applied. Mr. Torres, Morrison's voice shook despite her obvious effort to control it. This is completely unacceptable. You cannot summon a motorcycle gang to an elementary school. There are children here. There are safety protocols. There's a teacher who stripped my daughter of her chosen costume, forced her into clown clothes, painted her face against her will, and recorded it for social media content. Derek didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Where were your safety protocols when that was happening? Morrison's mouth opened, closed. Her eyes darted to Miss Crawford, who had pressed herself against the whiteboard at the front of the room, arms wrapped around her midsection in a protective gesture that would have seemed pitiful if Derek hadn't seen what she had done. I'm sure there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Miss Crawford is one of our most respected teachers. She would never. The evidence is right there. Derek pointed to the phone on the desk. 7 hours of recording, her own documentation of what she did. If you want to talk about misunderstandings, let's start there. Grizzly appeared in the doorway, his bulk blocking most of the available light. He surveyed the room with eyes that had seen violence and kindness in equal measure, eyes that could read a situation in seconds. Brother, his voice was gravel and smoke. What do you need? Witnesses. Derek met his eyes. Whatever happens next, I need people who saw it. People who can testify that we didn't touch anyone, didn't threaten anyone, didn't do anything except stand here and demand the truth. Grizzly nodded once. He turned to address the brothers crowded in the hallway. You heard him, eyes open, mouths shut unless spoken to. We're here to watch and remember. Nothing more, nothing less. A murmur of acknowledgement rippled through the assembled riders. 200 men settling into stillness, becoming a wall of leather and patient attention. The blonde woman, whose name Derek would later learn was Karen Whitmore, had retreated to the corner of the classroom near the coat closet. Her earlier bravado had evaporated entirely. She kept looking at Miss Crawford, then at the phone on the desk, then at the bikers in the hallway as if trying to reconcile reality with whatever story she had told herself about her friend. Miss Crawford's voice emerged small and strained. It wasn't supposed to. The video was just for... Just for what? Derek stepped toward her, and she flinched backward even though he hadn't raised a hand. Just for laughs, just for content, just for views. I needed... She stopped. Started again. You don't understand the pressure. Teaching doesn't pay enough. I have $80,000 in student loans and credit card debt. The algorithm favors controversial content. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was just exploiting an autistic child's distress for social media engagement. Derek's voice could have frozen fire. Just forcing a 6-year-old into a costume she didn't want, painting her face while she cried, making her stand in front of the class like a circus attraction. Also, you could get views. The other parents in the room had pressed themselves against the walls, their earlier complicit silence now transformed into the desperate hope that they wouldn't be noticed. The children sat rigid in their seats, eyes enormous, watching adult drama unfold with the bewildered attention of those who knew something important was happening, but couldn't quite grasp what. Lily hadn't moved from where she stood at the front of the room. The pink rabbit was clutched so tightly against her chest that its stuffing bulged between her fingers. But her eyes had found Derek and stayed there, anchoring herself to the one person in this room she knew beyond doubt would protect her. The sound of sirens grew closer. Someone had called the police, whether Morrison or one of the teachers or a concerned parent in the parking lot watching 200 bikers descend on an elementary school. It didn't matter who. What mattered was that official attention was coming, and with it, the opportunity for documentation that couldn't be disputed. Derek turned to Grizzly. Make sure none of the brothers interfere with the police when they get here. We're cooperative. We're calm. We're here because a child was being hurt and her father called for support. That's the story because that's the truth. Grizzly nodded and disappeared into the hallway to relay the instructions. Principal Morrison had found her phone was speaking rapidly into it in hushed tones. Probably the superintendent. Probably trying to explain how her school had become the center of a situation that would make the evening news. Probably trying to figure out how to spin this so it didn't end her career. Miss Crawford had begun to cry. Not the performance tears of someone caught and hoping for sympathy, but the genuine sobs of someone watching everything they had built collapse around them. Later, Derek might have found room for pity. Not today. The phone. He held out his hand toward her. Give it to me now or give it to the police when they arrive. Your choice. She looked at the device on her desk like it had transformed into a poisonous snake. Her hand moved toward it, hesitated, moved again. When she finally picked it up and placed it in Derek's palm, her fingers were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. The screen was still warm, still active. The recording app still open, still capturing everything happening in this room. Derek stopped the recording. 7 hours and 43 minutes of footage. He scrolled to the beginning of the day's file, found the timestamp that matched when Lily would have arrived at school and pressed play. The small speaker filled the silent classroom. Good morning, Lily. Oh my, don't you look official in that doctor's coat. The syrupy sweetness of the voice on the recording made Derek's jaw clench. On the screen, Lily appeared in frame exactly as she had looked that morning. White coat, crisp and bright, stethoscope around her neck. that small, hopeful smile on her face. Lily, sweetie, can you come with me for a moment? I need to talk to you about something. The camera angle shifted. When the image stabilized, it showed a corner of the classroom near the coat closet. Lily stood there confused, clutching the rabbit she must have pulled from her backpack. Here's the thing, Lily. Miss Crawford's voice came through, clearly preserved perfectly by the phone's microphone. Your costume is a little boring, don't you think? I mean, lots of kids want to be doctors. It's not very creative. But I want to be a doctor. Small, uncertain. The voice of a child being told that what she wanted didn't matter. I know, sweetie, but for today, for the presentation, I thought we'd do something more fun, more memorable. Rustling sounds. The teacher pulling something from a bag. Look, a clown costume. Isn't this better? Clowns make people smile. Doctors are so serious. I don't want Lily's voice getting smaller, stress creeping in. Come on, Lily, just for today. Trust me, everyone will love it. It'll be funny. The video showed Miss Crawford beginning to remove Lily's white coat. Lily pulled back resistant, her hands trying to keep the coat on. The teacher's voice lost its sweetness, becoming firm. Lily, we're doing this. Stop being difficult. In the classroom watching this happen, the little firefighter had buried his face in his hands. The girl dressed as a veterinarian was crying. Tommy Whitmore, Karen's son, stared at the screen with an expression of dawning horror. The video continued. Lily going nonverbal the way autistic children do when their nervous system overloads. The teacher dressing her in the clown costume while she stood, frozen tears starting to stream down her face. Then the makeup applied roughly, carelessly, while Lily trembled and clutched her rabbit. But it was what came next that revealed the full depth of the betrayal. Miss Crawford's voice speaking to herself, to the camera. This is going to be perfect. Definitely getting 5,000 views minimum. Maybe I'll finally hit the algorithm with this one. A pause while she positioned the phone back on the desk. Autistic kid dressed as clown for career day. The comments are going to be insane. Might even make it to TikTok compilations. The room had gone absolutely silent. Even the children seemed to understand that they had just heard something monstrous. That their teacher, the adult they were supposed to trust, had just revealed herself as something else entirely. Karen Whitmore had pressed her hand over her mouth. Her face had gone gray. Whatever defense she had prepared for her friend had died in her throat. Principal Morrison stood frozen near the door, the phone still held to her ear, though she was no longer speaking into it. Whoever was on the other end was getting a first-hand listen to the evidence. Derek stopped the video. He looked at Miss Crawford, who had collapsed into her desk chair, mascara streaming down her cheeks. You didn't just hurt my daughter. His voice was quiet, controlled. The voice of a man who had learned long ago that real power didn't need volume. You documented it, planned it, intended to broadcast it to the world. And now, thanks to your own recording, you've given me everything I need to make sure you never do this to another child again. The first police officers appeared in the doorway. Their hands rested near their weapons, their eyes scanning the room trying to make sense of 200 bikers, a crying teacher, and a small girl in a clown costume with a tear-streaked, painted face. Derek held up the phone. Officers, this device contains evidence of child abuse. The teacher you see here forced my autistic daughter to change out of her chosen costume, painted her face against her will, and documented the entire incident with the stated intention of posting it on social media for engagement. The officers exchanged glances. One of them, a woman with sergeant's stripes, stepped forward. Sir, we're going to need you to step outside, and I'm not going anywhere without my daughter. Derek's voice was steel-wrapped in velvet, but I'm happy to cooperate fully. The evidence is on this phone. The witnesses are in this room. The perpetrator is right there. He pointed at Miss Crawford. She looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes, and whatever she saw in his face made her shrink back into her chair. I want a lawyer. Her voice came out as a whisper. I have the right to a lawyer. You have the right to a lot of things. Derek turned away from her, dismissing her from his attention entirely. My daughter had the right to be safe at school. Let's see how your rights hold up against hers. Before he could move toward Lily, Grizzly stepped into the classroom. Behind him came Hawk, a massive man whose road name fit his build, but completely contradicted his gentle nature. Hawk carried something folded carefully over his arm, something white that caught the fluorescent lights. The white doctor's coat, found in the back of Miss Crawford's desk drawer where she had hidden it. Grizzly moved toward Lily with steps that belonged more to a grandfather than to a man whose reputation preceded him across 3 states. When he reached her, he did something that changed everything. He knelt down, not a crouch, a full kneel, bringing his 6'3" frame down to her eye level, making himself smaller, making himself safe. His braided beard nearly touched the floor. His hands, scarred from years of working on engines and living a life that left marks, rested gently on his knees. "Hey there, little doc." His gravelly voice softened into something almost tender. "That's a pretty rough costume they put you in, huh?" Lily looked up at this large man with his leather and silver and weathered face. For a moment, fear flickered across her expression. But then she saw his eyes, saw the kindness there, the patience, the understanding that asked nothing of her except to exist. She nodded, just slightly, the smallest acknowledgement. "You know what I think," Grizzly continued. "I think it's time we fix that. I think it's time you got to wear what you came here to wear, what you wanted to wear. What makes you feel like yourself?" Hawk stepped forward and handed the folded white fabric to Grizzly. Lily's eyes widened when she saw the doctor's coat. For the first time since Derek arrived, something sparked in them that wasn't pain or fear or confusion. Recognition, hope, the tiniest ember of joy. "Can we take off this clown stuff?" Grizzly asked gently. "Get you back into what a real doctor wears." Lily looked at her father. Derek nodded, squeezing the air between them with all the love he couldn't put into words. "It's okay, baby girl. Let's get you back to you." With movements that belonged to a grandfather more than a man whose reputation preceded him across 3 states, Grizzly began removing the clown costume pieces. The ruffled collar came off first, revealing Lily's pink top underneath, the one Elena had dressed her in that morning when the world still felt safe. Then the baggy pants carefully pulled down and folded aside, showing her white shorts. Hawk produced a package of wet wipes from somewhere in his vest, the kind bikers kept for cleaning road dust and grime. Grizzly used them to gently clean Lily's face, wiping away the garish makeup with patient strokes. The white foundation dissolved. The exaggerated smile disappeared. The blue diamonds faded. With each stroke, more of Lily emerged, more of the real child beneath the costume someone else had forced upon her. She sat very still through it all, her breathing steady, her eyes watching Grizzly's face as he worked, looking for signs of judgment, perhaps, or mockery, or the cruelty she had learned to expect. She found none of it. What she found was care, deliberate, focused care from a man who understood that she had been violated, that her autonomy had been stolen, and that restoration required gentleness. When her face was clean, Grizzly held up the white doctor's coat. "Arms up, Doc." Lily released her rabbit long enough to slip her arms into the sleeves. The coat settled onto her shoulders like a homecoming, familiar and right in hers. Hawk produced the toy stethoscope from his pocket, the one that had also been hidden in that desk drawer, and draped it around her neck. Grizzly sat back on his heels, surveying his work. "There, that's who you really are, little Doc. Not what that teacher tried to make you. This right here, this is the real Lily." Something shifted in her expression. The walls she had built over 3 weeks of trauma didn't come crashing down all at once. Healing doesn't work that way. But a crack appeared, light got in, and through that crack came something Derek hadn't seen in so long he had almost forgotten what it looked like. Lily smiled, not a full smile, not the uninhibited joy of a child who had never known hurt, but a smile nonetheless. Small, fragile, real. It transformed her face, brought color back to her cheeks, made her look like the girl who used to hum while coloring, who used to show her toy doctor kit to the neighbor kids, who used to believe the world was fundamentally safe. Her small hand found her father's larger one again, fingers intertwining, anchoring herself to the person who had protected her, who had believed her silent suffering meant something, who had refused to accept that this was just a phase. But her other hand, the one that had been clutching the rabbit, reached out tentatively toward Grizzly. Her fingers brushed the patch on his vest, the Hells Angels insignia that marked him as part of something bigger than himself, part of a brotherhood, part of a family that showed up when called, part of a community that protected its own. She traced the letters with one finger, her expression thoughtful. Then she looked up at Grizzly, and in her eyes was an understanding beyond her 6 years. These men weren't scary. They weren't dangerous. They were safe. They were protection. They were the wall between her and anyone who would hurt her again. Grizzly's weathered face softened into something that might have been emotion, might have been pride, might have been the complicated feeling of seeing a child understand that she matters, that she's worth defending, that 200 men dropped everything because her pain was important. "You're one of us now, little Doc." His voice was quiet. "That means if anyone ever tries to hurt you again, they don't just answer to your dad. They answer to all of us. You understand?" Lily nodded. And this time it wasn't the small, uncertain nod of a traumatized child. It was the nod of someone who had been given something precious, precious and rare, the knowledge that she wasn't alone, that she was protected, that she was safe. Derek felt his throat tighten. He had called his brothers hoping for backup, for witnesses, for the kind of presence that would force the truth into daylight. What he had gotten was so much more. He had gotten a family that didn't just stand with him, but knelt down to restore his daughter's dignity, piece by careful piece. The police separated them for questioning within an hour of the restoration. Detective Maria Santos, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, sat across from Derek in his own living room while a child psychologist from the department spoke with Lily in her bedroom. Elena had insisted on staying, and no one had the heart or the authority to make her leave. Derek answered every question with the precision of a man who had spent years giving after-action reports. Timeline, observations, evidence. He walked Santos through the 3 weeks of Lily's withdrawal, the phone calls to the school that had yielded nothing but reassurances, the decision to arrive unannounced and on career day. He described what he had seen when he opened that classroom door. The costume, the makeup, the phone recording, everything. Santos listened without interruption, her pen moving steadily across her notepad. When Derek finished, she was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "The footage on Miss Crawford's phone corroborates everything you've told me. 7 hours of recordings spanning multiple days. Your daughter wasn't the only target, but she appears to have been the primary one." Derek's hands curled into fists against his thighs. Multiple days. At least 3 weeks of documented incidents. Miss Crawford was building what she called a content library. She had notes about optimal posting times, hashtag strategies, which platforms would generate the most engagement. Santos's voice carried a thread of disgust she didn't bother to hide. She kept detailed records of which videos performed best. Your daughter's distress apparently generated significant viewer response. The cold thing in Derek's chest grew sharper. 3 weeks. The exact duration of Lily's suffering. Every day she had come home silent and broken. That woman had been recording her trauma and calculating how to monetize it. What happens now? Miss Crawford has been taken into custody. She's being charged with child endangerment, emotional abuse of a minor, and exploitation of a child for commercial purposes. Given the documentation she helpfully provided, the district attorney is confident about prosecution. Santos closed her notepad. "The school district is already in damage control mode. I expect you'll be hearing from their lawyers soon, probably with settlement offers designed to make this go away quietly." "I'm not interested in quiet." Santos studied him for a moment, something like respect flickering in her eyes. "I didn't think you would be. For what it's worth, Mr. Torres, you did the right thing today. A lot of parents would have just pulled their child and tried to move on. What you did, bringing witnesses, ensuring documentation, refusing to let this be swept under the rug, that takes courage." 3 days later, the lawsuit threat materialized in the form of a man named Richard Sloan. Derek was in the kitchen making breakfast when the doorbell rang. He opened it to find a man in an expensive 3-piece suit standing on his porch, salt and peppered hair perfectly styled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Torres, I'm Richard Sloan, attorney representing Miss Diane Crawford. May I come in?" Derek didn't move from the doorway. "Say what you came to say." Sloan's smile flickered but held. "My client is considering a countersuit against you for defamation, invasion of privacy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. What you did at that school, summoning 200 bikers to surround an elementary school, could be characterized as intimidation, terrorism even." Derek waited. "However," Sloan continued, We are prepared to forego all legal action if you agree to sign certain documents, specifically a non-disclosure agreement preventing you from speaking to the media, a commitment not to cooperate with the prosecution, and a statement acknowledging that the incident may have been a misunderstanding. Your client recorded herself explaining that she was exploiting my daughter for social media views. There's no misunderstanding to acknowledge. Video can be taken out of context. Statements made in moments of stress don't always reflect true intentions. A good defense attorney could argue that Miss Crawford was joking or that the recordings were meant to document concerning behavior for professional purposes. And you think a jury would believe that? Sloane's mask slipped slightly, revealing something harder underneath. I think a prolonged legal battle would be expensive and exhausting for everyone involved. I think your daughter has already been through enough without being dragged through depositions and court appearances. I think you might want to consider what's best for her long-term well-being rather than pursuing some vendetta against a teacher who made a mistake in judgment. Derek stepped forward. Sloane stepped backward, his confidence faltering. Let me tell you what I think. Derek's voice was low-controlled, carrying the weight of steel. I think your client tortured my daughter for 3 weeks. I think she did it deliberately, documented it carefully, and planned to profit from it. I think she saw a vulnerable child and decided that child's pain was worth money to her. He took another step. Sloane retreated to the edge of the porch. I also think you came here hoping to intimidate me, hoping that threats of legal action would make me crawl away and let your client escape consequences. But here's what you don't understand about me. Derek stopped leaving just enough space between them to be legal, just enough to be threatening. I spent 3 years in Afghanistan in places where people wanted to kill me every single day. I watched friends die. I held their bodies while the life drained out of them. I came home broken and spent years putting myself back together. And the only reason I'm still alive, the only reason I didn't eat my gun in a garage 5 years ago, is sleeping in a bedroom in this house right now. His voice dropped even lower. So when you threaten me with lawsuits and depositions and legal expenses, you need to understand something. I am not afraid of you. I am not afraid of your client. I am not afraid of anything your firm can throw at me. Because I have already survived things that would break most people, and I will walk through fire to protect my daughter. He stepped back, leaving space for Sloane to flee. We're done here. Don't come back. Sloane practically ran to his car. Derek watched him go, watched the expensive sedan disappear down the street, and felt something settle in his chest. Not peace, not yet, but certainty. That night, after Elena went home and Lily was asleep, Derek sat in the darkness of his living room and allowed himself to think about what he had almost done. The old Derek, the one who had come back from Afghanistan with death in his eyes and nothing left to lose, would have handled this differently. Would have found Miss Crawford alone somewhere. Would have made sure she understood consequences in ways that left marks. Would have let the rage drive him to actions that couldn't be taken back. He had thought about it. In that moment when he watched the video, when he heard her voice calculating how to monetize his daughter's pain, the old Derek had surged up inside him like a wave of black water. He had thought about calling different brothers, the ones who handled problems that couldn't be solved through legal channels. Had thought about the satisfaction of watching fear dawn in Miss Crawford's eyes, the way fear had lived in Lily's. But he hadn't done it, not because he was afraid of consequences, not because he had suddenly developed a deep respect for the legal system, but because Lily was watching, because every choice he made now was a lesson he was teaching her about how to live in a world that would not always be kind. Violence was easy, justice was hard, and Lily needed a father who chose the hard path. His phone buzzed, a text from Grizzly. Lawyer says Sloane's firm is backing off. Word got around about how he ran from your porch. No one wants to represent Crawford now. Derek stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Good. One less battle to fight. Grizzly's response came immediately. How's the little doc? Derek looked toward the hallway that led to Lily's room. Sleeping. We have a long road ahead. You're not walking it alone. None of you are. The preliminary hearing took place 6 weeks later in a San Bernardino courtroom that smelled of old wood and nervous sweat. Derek sat in the gallery with Grizzly on one side and Elena on the other, watching as Miss Crawford was brought in, wearing an orange jumpsuit that made her look smaller than he remembered. The evidence presentation took most of the morning. The prosecution played portions of the video recordings, enough to establish pattern and intent, without subjecting the courtroom to all 7 hours of documented abuse. Derek watched the judge's face as Miss Crawford's voice filled the room, talking about algorithms and engagement, and how autistic children generated the best viewer response. The judge's expression never changed, but something in his eyes hardened with each passing minute. Ms. Crawford's defense attorney, a public defender who had replaced the prestigious Richard Sloan, made half-hearted arguments about context and intention. But the evidence was overwhelming, documented by the defendant herself in excruciating detail. By the end of the day, the charges had been bound over for trial. Ms. Crawford was denied bail, the judge citing flight risk and the severity of the documented abuse. As she was led from the courtroom, she looked back once her eyes finding Derek in the gallery. He met her gaze without flinching, without anger, without anything at all. She had already taken enough from his family. She wouldn't take another moment of his emotional energy. The trial took place 4 months after Career Day in a San Bernardino courtroom packed with reporters, child advocacy representatives, and concerned parents who had followed the case through its every development. Derek sat in the front row of the gallery wearing a clean button-down shirt instead of his usual work clothes, his leather vest left at home out of respect for the proceedings. Grizzly sat beside him along with a dozen brothers who had rotated through the trial's duration, ensuring Derek was never alone in that courtroom. Elena occupied the seat on his other side, her weathered hands folded in her lap, her lips moving in what might have been prayer. Miss Diane Crawford sat at the defense table, her once styled hair now limp and gray at the roots, her face bare of makeup, her orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the professional attire she had worn in her classroom. She looked smaller than Derek remembered, diminished, like something essential had been drained out of her during her months in custody. Her public defender had done what he could with an indefensible case. He argued that Crawford had been under extreme financial pressure, drowning in $80,000 of debt from student loans and credit cards. He presented testimony from a psychologist who suggested she suffered from a form of social media addiction, a compulsive need for online validation that had clouded her judgment. He pointed out that she had never actually uploaded any of the videos, that no harm had come to children beyond the school's walls. The prosecution dismantled each argument methodically. They played portions of the 7 hours of footage, enough to establish the pattern of deliberate cruelty without subjecting the jury to every moment of documented abuse. They brought in child psychology experts who testified about the lasting impact of such treatment on autistic children. They presented Crawford's own notes, meticulous records of which videos generated the most engagement, which hashtags performed best, which platforms would be most receptive to content featuring children in distress. And they played Lily's recorded testimony. Derek had prepared himself for this moment, had steeled his heart against the pain of hearing his daughter describe what had been done to her. But nothing could have truly prepared him for the reality of it. On the screen, Lily sat in a room designed to feel safe, surrounded by familiar objects, the white doctor's coat draped over her small shoulders. Dr. Sarah Chen, the child psychologist who had been working with Lily since the beginning, asked gentle questions, giving her time to find her words, never pushing, never rushing. "Lily, can you tell me what happened when you got to school on Career Day?" A long pause. Lily's fingers traced the edge of the stethoscope around her neck. "I was wearing my doctor coat, the real one, with the pocket." Her voice was small but steady. "Miss Crawford said it was boring. She said other things would be more fun." "What other things?" "The clown clothes." Lily's grip tightened on the stethoscope. "I said no. I said I didn't want to. But she made me anyway." "How did that make you feel?" "Scared." The word came out barely above a whisper. "And set. And wrong, like I wasn't me anymore." The jury sat in absolute stillness. Several members wiped tears from their eyes. "Lily, is there anything you want to say to the people watching this video?" Another long pause. Then Lily looked directly at the camera with eyes that held more wisdom than any 6-year-old should possess. "If someone hurts you, tell a grown-up. Keep telling until someone listens. You're not bad. You're not wrong. The person hurting you is wrong." In the courtroom, Derek wiped tears from his face without shame. Beside him, Grizzly sat motionless, but Derek could see the tension in his jaw, the controlled fury in his eyes. Miss Crawford at the defense table had buried her face in her hands. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Derek sat in the gallery as the verdict was read, feeling each word land like a hammer blow against everything that had been done to his daughter. Child endangerment, guilty, emotional abuse of a minor, guilty, attempted exploitation of a child for commercial purposes, guilty. Miss Crawford collapsed in her seat when the final count was announced. Her attorney put a hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off, shoulders heaving with sobs that had come too late to matter. The sentencing hearing came 2 weeks later. Judge Harrison, who had presided over the entire trial, looked at Miss Crawford for a long moment before speaking. In 30 years on the bench, I have seen many things that troubled me, but I have rarely encountered something as deliberately cruel as what you did to this child. Miss Crawford stood at the defense table, her orange jumpsuit now familiar, her face hollow with the weight of consequences she had never anticipated. You took a vulnerable little girl, a child with developmental differences that made her uniquely susceptible to your manipulation, and you exploited her pain for personal gain. You documented your abuse with the intention of broadcasting it to the world. You turned a classroom into a torture chamber and called it content creation. The judge's voice remained steady, but something cold burned in his words. The court sentences you to 3 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You will be required to complete extensive psychological counseling. You will be permanently prohibited from working with children in any capacity. And you will be placed on the child abuse registry, where your name and your crimes will be publicly accessible for the rest of your life. He paused, letting the sentence sink in. Miss Crawford, children are supposed to be able to trust the adults in their lives. You violated that trust in one of the most fundamental ways possible. I hope that during your time in prison, you come to understand the magnitude of what you've done. The gavel fell, court was adjourned, and somewhere in a modest house in San Bernardino, a little girl in a white doctor's coat was finally truly safe. The seasons turned in San Bernardino, summer heat giving way to autumn cool, and with them turned the pages of Lily's recovery. 8 months had passed since career day. 8 months since 200 motorcycles had descended on Pine Ridge Elementary. 8 months since a father's instinct had exposed a predator hiding behind a teacher's desk. Derek stood at the kitchen window on a Tuesday morning in March, watching Elena help Lily into the car for her drive to Westbrook Academy, a private school specializing in children with developmental differences. The white doctor's coat, now noticeably shorter on Lily's growing frame, hung over her regular clothes. She had insisted on wearing it every day for the first month at her new school, a security blanket made of fabric and memory. Now she wore it only on special occasions when she needed extra courage or wanted to remind herself who she truly was. Today was one of those occasions. Career day had come around again. The irony wasn't lost on Derek. A full year since the worst day of his daughter's life, and here they were facing the same event that had shattered everything. But this time was different. This time Lily had chosen to participate. This time she had asked to present. This time she was ready. His phone buzzed. Grizzly. Thinking about you and the little doc today. Brothers are standing by if you need anything. Derek smiled despite his worry. The Brotherhood's support hadn't wavered in all these months. They checked in regularly, attended Lily's therapy milestones, showed up at autism awareness events wearing their colors in their commitment to protecting vulnerable kids. He typed back, "She's stronger than any of us gave her credit for, but I appreciate knowing you're there." The response came immediately, "Always, that's what family does." At 11:15, his phone rang. Westbrook Academy. "Mr. Torres, this is Principal Reeves. I wanted to call you personally to let you know how Lily's presentation went." Derek's heart clenched. "How was it?" A warm laugh came through the speaker. "Mr. Torres, it was wonderful." Lily stood in front of her entire class in her doctor's coat and gave a presentation about why she wants to be a physician. She spoke clearly and confidently for almost 5 minutes. Several of her classmates asked questions afterward, and she answered every one. Derek sat down heavily, his legs suddenly unreliable. She did. But that's not why I'm calling." Principal Reeves paused. At the end of her presentation, Lily said something I thought you should hear. She said that last year someone tried to take away her dream by making her feel ashamed of who she was. But she learned that being different isn't something to hide. It's something to celebrate. And she learned that because her father showed her what it means to fight for the people you love. Derek couldn't speak. His throat had closed around a knot of emotion too complex to name. Mr. Torres, in 20 years of education, I've rarely seen a child demonstrate that kind of courage and self-awareness. You should be very proud of her. I am. The words came out rough, barely audible. I am. Elena brought Lily home at 3:30 and Derek met them in the driveway. His daughter climbed out of the car with a smile that could have powered the entire city, the white coat slightly askew on her shoulders, her eyes bright with triumph. Daddy, I did it. I talked to everyone and they listened and nobody laughed, and Mrs. Patterson said I was very professional. Derek crouched to meet her, bringing himself to her level the way he always did for important moments. I heard. Principal Reeves called me. She said you were amazing. Lily's smile widened even further. I was scared at first. My tummy felt wiggly. But then I remembered what you said, that being scared doesn't mean you can't be brave. It means you're being brave anyway. That's exactly right, baby girl. And I remembered the Chews, how they came to help us even though they didn't know what was happening. They were probably scared too, but they came anyway. Derek's throat tightened again. A year later, and Lily still thought about that day, still drew strength from the memory of 200 men who had dropped everything to stand with her. They would be so proud of you. He pulled her into a hug, feeling her small arms wrap around his neck. I'm so proud of you. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Derek sat on the back porch with a beer. He wasn't really drinking, watching the stars come out over San Bernardino. He thought about that morning a year ago, the morning he had almost not gone to the school. He had been second-guessing himself all week, wondering if he was being paranoid, overprotective, reading too much into normal childhood phases. Lily's therapist had said withdrawal could be developmental. The school had assured him everything was fine. Even Elena had suggested maybe he just needed to give it time. But something in his gut had refused to let go. That persistent, nagging certainty that something was wrong, that his daughter's silence was screaming something he needed to hear. So he had gone, unannounced, without permission, without an appointment or a scheduled conference, or any of the proper channels that institutions preferred. He had shown up when he wasn't expected. And that had made all the difference, because if he had called ahead, if he had scheduled a visit during official parent hours, that phone would have been put away. The clown costume would have been hidden. Lily would have been in her doctor's coat, and Miss Crawford would have performed the role of caring teacher just long enough to convince him everything was fine. The exploitation would have continued. The trauma would have deepened, and Lily's silence would have stretched from weeks into months, maybe years, maybe a lifetime of not trusting adults to protect her. Derek took a sip of his beer and let the lesson sink in the way he had let it sink in every day for the past year. Children withdraw for reasons. They stop eating for reasons. They clutch comfort objects for reasons. They avoid places and people and situations for reasons. And when a child can't verbalize those reasons, when autism or age or fear or trauma locks the words inside, it becomes the parent's job to investigate, to observe, to trust the instinct that evolution had hardwired into humanity for exactly these moments. Silence protects predators. Speaking up protects children. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply show up, pay attention, and refuse to look away. The sliding door opened behind him. Lily appeared in her pajamas, the pink rabbit tucked under one arm, her eyes still heavy with almost sleep. Daddy, I had a dream. Derek set down his beer and opened his arms. Lily climbed into his lap, her small body warm against his chest. A bad dream. No, she snuggled closer. A good dream. I dreamed I was a real doctor, and I was helping kids who felt different. And the Chews were there too, making sure nobody bothered us while we worked. Derek held her tighter, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his own. That sounds like a beautiful dream, baby girl. Daddy. Yes, sweetheart. I'm glad you didn't give up. When I couldn't talk, when I couldn't tell you what was wrong, I'm glad you kept trying to find out. Derek closed his eyes against the tears that threatened to fall. I will never give up on you, Lily. Never. That's what daddies do. That's what family does. Like the Chews. Exactly like the Chews. They sat together in the darkness, father and daughter, surrounded by the ordinary sounds of a suburban evening. Somewhere in the distance, a motorcycle engine rumbled, and Lily lifted her head to listen. One of ours, Derek smiled. Could be. They're always out there somewhere, baby girl, watching out for people who need protecting. Lily nodded satisfied and settled back against his chest. Derek looked up at the stars, thinking about everything that had happened in the past year. The fear, the fury, the moment when 200 brothers had answered a single phone call. The trial, the verdict, the slow, steady work of healing. He thought about the scholarship fund Grizzly had started, now grown to $500,000. The network of brothers across the country training to recognize signs of child abuse. The parents who had reached out after hearing Lily's story, finding courage to trust their own instincts, to question the institutions that told them everything was fine. What had begun as one father's desperate attempt to protect his daughter had grown into something larger. A movement, a community, a declaration that children matter, that their pain is worth fighting against, that no family has to face these battles alone via mom. Daddy, yes, baby girl. When I grow up and become a doctor, can I help kids like me, kids who are different? You can help anyone you want to help, Lily. That's the whole point of becoming a doctor. Good. She yawned, her eyes growing heavy again. Because I think there are a lot of kids who need someone to understand them. Someone who knows what it feels like. Derek kissed the top of her head. I think you're right. And I think you're going to be exactly the doctor those kids need. Lily was asleep within minutes, her breathing slow and steady against his chest. Derek held her as the stars wheeled overhead, as the night deepened around them, as somewhere in San Bernardino, a woman in an orange jumpsuit contemplated the magnitude of what she had done. He thought about carrying Lily back to her bed, but decided against it. Some moments were too precious to end. Some nights were meant for holding on. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to make a difference. But tonight his daughter was safe in his arms. Tonight, the silence between them was the good kind, the peaceful kind. The silence of two people who had been through something together and had emerged stronger on the other side. I've got you, baby girl. Derek whispered the words that had become his nightly prayer, his promise, his purpose. I've got you, and I'm never letting go. The pink rabbit slipped from Lily's grip and landed softly on the porch beside them. Derek looked at it, remembering the weeks when it had been clutched like a lifeline, the only safe thing in a world that had become unbearable. Now it was just a stuffed animal, still loved, still important, but no longer necessary for survival. That was healing, not the absence of scars, but the ability to carry them. Not forgetting what had happened, but integrating it into something larger. Not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new chapter. Derek closed his eyes and let the night wrap around them both. Tomorrow, Lily would wake up and tell him about her career day presentation again, adding new details she had remembered overnight. Tomorrow he would call Grizzly and share the news that the little doc had faced her fear and won. Tomorrow the work of building a better world for vulnerable children would continue. But tonight there was only this: a father and his daughter, a porch and a sky full of stars, a silence that spoke of safety, of love, of the unbreakable bond between those who had weathered the storm together. The worst was behind them. Whatever came next, they would face it the same way they had faced everything else, together.